So what we're going to talk about is I actually went out and tackled an easy girdling root. I did that for someone because he was older, and when you see a root growing right beside the base of your tree, you should at least dig it up and see what it's doing. Then we're going to talk about pruning an overgrown shrub. That one probably should have been pruned earlier. Renovating an overgrown bed. Not complicated, but a couple points I just want to make. Address overgrown shrub by the house. That's a plant out of place for sure. And then just simple heading cut on the shrub where you're just trying to reduce the size of it. Just so it, in this case, so it starts growing more like a shrub again, because one of the shoots, one of the plant parts was just being very aggressive in growth. And then just show the triple cut method to remove a large limb. That's for safety of the trees while you do the triple cut method because of the weight of the limb, and I'll talk about that. Just talk a little bit about privacy, addressing some issues with drainage in the landscape, and we'll finish up just looking at some plants in different environments and just talking about plant selection just briefly. I don't want to keep you late tonight. So, on this tree, I noticed that this root was growing right beside the trunk. And so I just do what now?
I'm gonna pump.
This is the longest one because I actually had Christina filming me. Should have had her filming do the other stuff too.
I'm Yoder, Extension Educator in Marshall County, and we're just looking at a tree to see potentially if a girdling root is impacting one side of the tree. Typically, these roots are starting when we plant a landscape tree too deep, where there's adventitious roots that come out of the trunk due to the deep planting, and sometimes they grow in a fashion where they don't grow straight out of the side of the tree, or involved in burlap trees or container trees where we don't properly loosen up the roots of the tree when we plant them. So they're already growing in a circular direction instead of staying straight out. So before we plant any tree, we'll make sure that we loosen the roots and even cut through the roots. Sometimes to make sure the roots will grow away from the tree and not around the base of the tree. And the third reason that causes this is when people landscape around trees with hard structures and then put in potting soil or just regular soil to create a raised bed to plant flowers and other plants into. And when that happens, again, by burying the trunk of the tree with that soil, you created an advantageous root to grow out of the trunk. But when it grows out, even if it's growing straight out, it'll hit that hard structure, curl back and become a root that can be twined around the base of the tree. Initially, these roots usually aren't up the side of the tree, but as the trunk of the tree grows out and the root grows larger itself, they grow together. And eventually that starts cutting off nutrient flow into the main trunk of the tree, impacting the health of the tree. And if it's too severe of a situation, it can even terminate the tree's lifespan significantly due to that root cutting off nutrient flow into the tree itself. So we'll check out this girdling. Okay, this is a girdling. So we're going to dig back and see what we have here. We can see on this side of the tree, we have nice root flare where the base of the tree is coming out and is not going straight into the soil. So this root flare tells me that we've got a nice healthy root system coming out of this large maple tree. So I'm not concerned. Even back here, you can see this root on top of the surface coming straight out. So that's a good indication we have a healthy root system around this side of the tree. So this tree is set up good for having a healthy root system. You have to remember a root system of a tree tends to sprawl out a long ways away from the trunk
In fact, if you lay down a tree, that's an indication how far the root system can spread away from the tree itself. But on this side of the tree, instead of having a nice root flare coming out on this side of the tree, what I'm seeing is more of a flat surface of the tree without a nice root coming out in this direction. And then I'm seeing this root here that's growing up beside the tree. So we're going to dig back and just see what that root looks like and see if they could be impacting this side of the tree ability to be getting nutrients into the tree. You guys see an old man working?
You posted this.
Yeah. So, this root. The minor girdling root compared to some roots that can threaten the life of the tree. So this root actually probably came from another tree. It probably didn't come from this tree. It just happens to be growing back close to the root. From the main root that's on below it. So it's not, they're going to grow together. That could be an issue. And then this root, over time, will continue to expand and be growing into the side of the tree. So as you look at the health of the tree hasn't been impacted by this root yet. So that's good news. Caught it early. This tree is well leafed out to the top, and we'll show you an image of that later. But we'll go ahead and remove this root, and won't impact the health of the tree. It's not a major root, but over time, this root can grow to the size where it's impacting the side of the tree. So good news, it's not as bad as I thought it could be. And that's when we like to find a root that could impact the health of the tree, particularly on one side. Root, it's a so the point is you can see how this root is already growing in and impacting the root. It's a larger root supporting the tree by growing into it. You can see where the root below it is already starting to shift. How it's growing, trying to grow around the obstruction, which is actually just a root that's attached to this tree.
Bob was really working at this room.
Where the impact was happening with this root was it's growing right on top of a major root, opening it up to where it could be damaging it. And then the other root was positioned that over time it could grow into the side of the tree, limiting the health of that base of the trunk on this side as they grew together, because it was down the road. So this is a healthy tree. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of issues associated with managing girdling roots. Where we cut off the roots, obviously, that wood is just going to be dying because we cut the connection
within that trunk, just how we would remove a vine from a tree. And we didn't expose any of the healthy trunk tissue in the process of removing the girdling roots. In a more severe situation, the problem is a lot of the roots are coming out in multiple areas when we do practices that encourages advantageous roots. And the challenge there is trying to weed through all the roots, determining which ones need to be removed and which ones should remain. So that is a bigger project. And I don't have a film long enough to do a major project like that and record it. But this one was a pretty simple situation. By removing these roots here, we're not going to have roots growing into the side of the tree. And that's what you want to look for. Whenever you see a tree that looks like a utility post in the ground, you want to be digging back the soil to make sure there's not girdling roots involved. And that would be more of a severe case. We can look at this base of this tree and see even it's healthy, fairly healthy on this side. And the health of this overall tree, what you want to do to check health of the trees is look at the top. At the top of this tree, you just look up into the canopy. There's some branches that are actually on the side that need to be pruned out that are dead. But if you go on up to the canopy to the top, it still leads out clear to the top, indicating that overall health of this tree is still pretty solid. Because what happens, we call stag boarding. When a tree is really under a lot of stress, they'll start dying at the top down. So my concern with this tree was the dead branches on this side of the tree, and noting that there was a girdling root associated with the tree, so at least we leave this one stress. Victory.
So that one wasn't that bad. And like I said, I really think that was just, there's so many trees there. That's probably a root from another tree just grew up beside that tree, you know, and over time it could have impacted that tree.
How much time did you end up with digging that out?
Well, how long?
20 minutes.
A little while, because you don't want to damage the tree as you're trying to dig around that root. So you got to be careful that you're not damaging the bark tissue of the root that root was growing over and the side of the tree. Because I don't want to damage the tree. I'm trying to help.
Right.
So that took a little time.
Mm-hmm.
I once took on the project of where they did the raised bed, and we had a sawzall, and it with a homeowner. It took a long time. And I would never volunteer to do that again. Because first reason is, and Price Nursery turned them down. He asked Price Nursery to do it for him. They just said no, because if you take too many roots the tree needs, the health of the root would just be damaged by removing too many roots that are feeding the tree in that process. So. The next ones won't be as long. So this is a shrub that I showed in a picture earlier that is in need of some care. So let's give it some care. So what we want to look in this picture is you're seeing all these sprouts coming up. That's telling you that bottom wood on the shrub is not healthy. It's a lilac, and they get a lot of borer insects into them that can impact their health. So this is one shrub. Now you actually could just cut this off at the ground and be done with it and see what regrows, because they are very vigorous in regrowing. But I'm not going to do that, and I'll explain why in a minute on this one. This is quick. This is a lilac shrub that I'm going to prune. I'm going to show you some pictures of it up close. It has older wood that needs to be removed to regenerate the shrub so it has healthier growth. Ideally, I would do this in the spring of the year after it flowers, and I would do it later in the fall when it's not going to regrow. But we're supposed to have cooler temperatures, so regrowth shouldn't be that big of a deal now that we're in October. So I'm going to go ahead and prune this tree, this shrub, and let you see how it looks after. As you can see, there's a big change in the shrub
appearance at this point. All the thicker stumps at the base of this shrub are eventually going to be removed as we allow new wood that's growing from the soil to take over in time. I do have some stems that you can see at the base that are not attached to the old.
Just see how gnarly that
trunks
stuff
have been
is.
devastated
Should have been
by,
done earlier.
insect damage over time that will eventually be selected to grow and replace the older wood. Lilac shrub, I could have just cut it down to the ground and removed all the damaged wood now, and this type of a shrub could regenerate and regrow over time. But this is a border planting, so leaving some of the old trunk and branches to help provide visual barrier between the neighboring properties is the reason why I can't do that in this case. Now I got another project here to do next year, and it's beside it. And to not remove all the visual barrier, I'll start doing this one next year after it blooms and start reducing its size as well to eventually have a healthy lilac shrubs in between. And looking at the leaves of the lilac, you can see that you do have powdery mildew, which if you have a lilac, that is typical.
Okay, get out of that.
So what do you do with the powdery mildew?
Enjoy it.
You don't kill it?
So what I wanted to show you here is that you can see I did move a lot of the damaged older wood there out of the shrub. And what's remaining, I'll just start removing part of this each year to try and maintain a visual barrier because it's a border planting. So any shrub that you have in your property, you want to go in every so often and remove some of the bigger wood so it's regenerating new wood. This one was neglected. It should have been done a while ago. So when you're looking at your properties, doing a landscape check, just look at your shrubs and just seeing if some of the wood is getting pretty big and old, and you can just prune that out, and the younger wood will just fill in that spot and regenerate. So it's just a matter of on shrubs over time. And you can take if you want a new shrub and never have it look like it's being pruned, you can do this over 4 years of just pruning out the larger wood each year, letting the new wood regrow and fill in. And at the end, you totally regenerate that shrub without stressing the plant. The rule of thumb on pruning is always 1/3. We don't want to remove more than 1/3 of the plant at any pruning time, or we're going to put some stress on the plant. Just some shrubs can tolerate it more than others, and lilacs is one of those that because of this insect borer. And again, that pest, we really manage it by pruning the wood out to generate new wood versus trying to spray for it. Some trees you have to try and attack boring insects like peach trees because they don't have this regenerating property. You know, it's a tree. You want to save your trunk. This one, we just generate new wood. So that's the reason. That's really a business over there. So having just some visual break is good. So renovating a shrub, a bed. So we got some invasive plants in this. What looks like a shrub because it's been pruned several times without treating with glyphosate to kill the. There's 2 ways we can deal with woody ornamentals coming up in our landscape, and we can use glyphosate 2%, or what else could we do? Just dig it out, get the main trunk out of the soil then, and do it quicker than before it gets big. And then we have disease issues too in this bed, which we'll show you quick. This is a peony bed that has basic plants that need to be removed. I'll cut out the woody perennials that are growing in here and stump treat with a 2% glyphosate solution on the ends of the stump. Looking at the peonies material that's left, you can see that it's diseased, so it doesn't need just to be cut down and left in the bed. In this case, it needs to be removed from the bed, so the fungal disease isn't readily available to reinfest or regrowth next spring. And there's other ornamental plants in this bed, but I'll get rid of the invasives and stump treat the invasives. This is Oriental bittersweet, which will grow in bed. It's kind of tough to grow, control in season. And then I just have a couple tree starts, that a maple tree and a ash tree that need to be removed. We'll see what it looks like after I clean up this bed. Now that we got the debris, we're back to having a flower bed. The woody ornamentals in this bed were stump treated with glyphosate, so hopefully if they regrow, we'll get that addressed in the spring, with pruning and treatment again. The Oriental bittersweet was pulled up by the root. The next year I'll need to pay attention to regrowth by that weed, because it's rhizomatous, so some remaining root may shoot up some new shoots. Pulled out the grass that was in the bed, spread from the yard to the bed, so we're back to having our mainly a peony bed with some lilies and some bulbs that are here that will give color early in the spring. The bed is completed. The debris is removed. Did add some organic matter on top to kind of replace the leaves that I removed from this bed due to disease. But this bed's ready to go for next year, but we'll have to monitor it next year for invasive plants. Get ahead of the program next year, keep them out. And allow the peonies, lilies, my bulb plants to flourish. So that's part of what you want to always do in the land. Be checking your landscape throughout the year, like I've already said, for invasive plants, because the rhizomatous in this case. So even though I pulled out the plant, there's little roots in there that have nodes that can produce new shoots to grow up. So even though it's underneath the ground, it's really stem tissue, not root tissue. That's what a rhizome is. We all know what irises are. They're rhizomatous too, and they actually get so thick we have to thin them. But there's invasive plants that are the same way. The good thing is bunch grass in the land in the bed. So when I pull out that bunch grass, it's done. Have you ever heard of quack grass? It's a invasive grass that has rhizomes, and it's a challenge because even though you pull it out, you leave bits behind that will sprout again and start new grass the following year. So whenever you have anything that's rhizomatous as a weed in any of your beds, you got to stay diligent and keep looking for it until it's totally gone. Any questions? Okay. Oh no, what a mess. So you know that's not good, right? That shouldn't be there. Let's print it back and see how bad it is. This is an example of a shrub that's in the wrong place. This burning bush wants to be much larger than the space provided here for it. it's been reduced in size several times to make it fit. And it just keeps growing back and continues to be a maintenance issue. So there's a couple plants growing in with this shrub. As in that one picture I showed in a previous segment, that need to be removed and the stumps treated with 2% glyphosate solution so it doesn't regrow once this is reduced. The goal would be to replace this shrub at some point. It would be a good opportunity next year. Pruning a shrub back severely in the fall of the year is not recommended, but when it's almost an invasive plant and its ability to grow, what regrowth it will have prior to a killing frost will be not hardened off and removed. But in this case, that's okay if the long term is just to remove the shrub. I'll go ahead and print it back and we'll see what we have when I'm done. So the challenge here is that they're at the size they should be now. That's why these are plants that are.
You get that point? Now I whacked them back, that's what the shrub size should be,
Spring by being.
with no regrowth.
Plant that wasn't gonna be very aggressive in growth. This would work. You always want to be able to walk behind your shrubs by your house so you can do maintenance on your house. You never want your shrubs typically to be blocking your windows. I guess if you want privacy is one reason, but I think blinds work better than shrubs growing in front of your window. So actually, this job is not finished. Either of these shrubs, and they should be, removed this spring. If you look further on down, you can see the regrowth on two of the shrubs that I cut back earlier in the summer months. And you can see the regrowth that occurred. So these shrubs, because both the holly and the burning bush have the ability to regrow, produce new buds to grow from lower down in the stem tissue. So cutting them beyond where there's green will not stop these shrubs, exhibited by the shrubs further down that are green again. So if you look closely at these shrubs, you can see old cuts that were done earlier to reduce the size of the shrubs. So this is not the first time that they had to do this. So either to keep these shrubs in the landscape, they got to be further pruned back, or replaced would be the best solution. A low maintenance landscape, you not have shrubs that you need to do this to on a routine basis, just due to the challenge of maintenance and time. If you get busy one summer and skip it, before you know it, they're back close to being a bothersome plant. And then when they get extremely bushy, addressing the invasive plants that move in with the birds that like this habitat that's created can be a challenge. The larger trees that were growing in this will be stump treated, or are stump treated by the time you see this video. But this are your options. Either you have shrubs that are aggressive that have to be cut way back and not be that attractive the next year, because if we're going to keep these, further cut these back to where the regrowth will not be as full and beautiful, and then it will have to be made at a smaller height, which will be a continual maintenance challenge. So you can see that, right here, I printed these back just as severely as those earlier, and the regrowth is already back to where it needs to be pruned again. So ideally, I can maintain the hollies if I really took them back further in the middle and just be pruning them all the time to keep them small, but that's called maintenance. And I have a busy, if you have a busy life, who has the time to be always pruning shrubs? Be better to replace it with a plant that has a mature height that's going to be what you want, and not be doing the pruning. If you like maintenance work and pruning shrubs, this is the plant you want to plant because you'll be doing it all the time. But I have been reducing the size on these shrubs, and they just need to go. Do you agree, or would you keep them?
Like you said, it's a lot of work to keep it.
You better really, really love it.
Yeah, it's every fall you should be cutting them back, so they have to do a lot of new regrowth. They're going to keep them. The hollies, you just have to be. Well, I had them at a church in Southern Indiana. Someone's job is to prune them all the time. I have a handicapped wife. I'll tell you right now, I don't have the time the normal person has to do landscape maintenance. So they're gone. They're gone. I'd rather just have rock.
And you enjoy it and know what you're doing, yeah.
Well,
And the rest of us, yeah, we're
well,
here.
yeah. Well, and so that's the question. And what you do is you select plants that are going to be the mature height that's manageable. So instead of right beside the house, which I have you can put out smaller trees and stuff out away from the house, but anything that goes up by the house, you should not have to prune your shrubs back to do maintenance to your house. So you need to have that space to where you can do maintenance. There's the limestone goes clear down to the ground, so they're not even needed to hide the house. We used to do a lot of shrubs by houses because you could see cement blocks and then they build up from there. Those kind of houses, you can do border plantings that would hide that, and then shrubs will fit in there. And there's other shrubs you can get like junipers and things that don't grow as tall, but you got to maintain those two to keep them the size you want. Because once they get big, then you can't prune them back ever. Because junipers, when you prune past the green, that wood is dead. So, but if you want to maintain these at a smaller height, I would reduce these another half down because all this is aggressive regrowth. So you're not going to kill the shrubs by doing that, and force it to start new growth closer to the ground that then again you maintain. Does that make sense?
Would you kill out some of those stems?
Yeah, you could reduce the number of stems, cutting them off more closer to the ground, and others you just downsize in half size. So you're forcing new wood to grow.
But you wouldn't use that phosphate to kill it. Your glycophosphate. stuff.
No, because that'd kill the shrub. So I only use that when I want to kill the plant so it never regrows. So
2%
Yeah.
glyphosate.
yeah, it's 2% glyphosate, 2% water, and you wear gloves, and you can use the brush method where you just dip it in a brush and paint it on, or you can put it in an applicator and spray it.
Where do you get
Any box store, you just don't follow the recommendation is going to be to kill weeds, so it's going to be more dilute. But when you use it as a stump treatment, it needs to be 2% glyphosate. So it's not hard. So if it's you just do the math to make it 2%, how much water you'd have to add to the fluid based upon the percent that's in the container.
Is that like what kind of brand name is that?
Well, Roundup,
Oh, okay, round.
Oh,
but it comes in many forms, but the standard concentration's 41%. So, you need that, dilute it down to just a 2% solution versus, 2% glyphosate, the solution is pretty strong. So just check the container and see.
Is that what you would put on mulberry bushes that start growing in your in the hedges?
Yeah.
You paint it on?
But if you cut it back, then you just apply black phosphate to the stump and it soaks into the wood, and then whatever it regrows, you'll prune off next year and treat it again.
I got a lot of that.
Any other questions?
What did you say? 2% glyphosate and some kind of percent of water?
Or just the water is what you're adding to it to
To
get down,
dilute it. to
dilute it
2%.
down to 2%.
Okay. Okay, got it. Thank you. It won't kill the shrubs beside it?
No, if you just put it on the stump that you apply it to, and that's why you want to be careful how you apply it. Because even they used to think that when we use Roundup to control weeds, it would not hurt the trees to spray the wood. That's wrong. We've learned that it does. So you only apply it to what you want to control.
Okay.
And but then it doesn't regrow. You don't have those issues. So what other kind of, so typically a shrub, the heading back cut I'm going to show is one way that would control height. And then we move some of the wood over the years just to keep new wood coming. So this next one is just a lilac shrub. I don't know why my wife likes lilacs, but it's a lilac shrub that's growing like a tree instead of a shrub. So we need to help reduce the size so it starts behaving more like a shrub. On plants, you have an apical meristem, we call it, is where the cell division occurs. And the most aggressive part of the plant at the tips is going to reduce the growth of smaller wood in the plant. So what's happening in the shrub, I'm having a rogue part of the plant that's being really aggressive and getting large in size, taking all the energy from the other branches. So that's why it's looking really thin. It's because this one branch right here that's coming up out of the base of the shrub is the tallest one and the most aggressive one. So it's getting all the energy out of the roots and it's doing all the growth. So instead of looking like a shrub, it's almost starting to look like a tree, with branches coming out of its base. So I want this to be a shrub, again, to have more fullness. So I have more blooms down a level that I can pick them for my wife and make her happy. Happy wife is a happy life, right?
Right?
I need to encourage this plant to behave. And when you're pruning a plant, you never go kill a plant unless you aggressively prune something that doesn't have that aggressive rebound, like some of the shrubs I've been talking about. When we're pruning a plant, we're just trying to correct the growth and encourage growth to go in another area. When we're talking about shrubs. So that's what I'm going to do with this one. Okay, this shrub is starting to grow more like a tree than a shrub. So I'm going to have to head back some of the branches to allow some of the this one's way up here to grow properly compared to these other ones. Versus up and forth. And then I do have some issues here with some branches growing close to other branches. And I'll just remove those at this time. So as they get bigger, they're just rubbing against each other. So, we'll look at it after that. So see, can we stop it? So here's some of my pruning cuts that I made. I didn't go clear up here because I wanted to be away a little bit so it'll grow over it. But, so I've done several cuts. And this is the art, not the science of pruning, is you're just trying to reshape it to where you're going to want growth to occur. So remove some of the branches so we get growth going in the right direction. And I reduced this one way back just so that these other branches would get more energy to grow next spring.
Well, this is
Sure, so-
back now. It's gonna give some other growing plants an opportunity to express themselves next spring. And it's gonna behave more like a shrub. But I did another cardinal sin. I pruned a spring flowering shrub. So I removed several buds in the process of pruning this lilac shrub into shrub form. So we'll monitor its growth next year. And ideally, when you're done pruning a shrub or a tree, at a glance, you're not supposed to tell that anything was done. We need to make sure that when we take the pruning cut, that we allow it to grow over the cut, meaning we don't go flush with the tree, but we are leaving the area around the base of the trunk.
The collar.
I
didn't have a script.
area. We don't cut into that, 'cause that's what's gonna grow over the pruning cut. So again, there's a reason why we wanna make sure this stays a shrub. If we look up and we can see there's a power line over this plant. So we never wanted it to become a tree form presentation like it was starting to become. So we'll keep it in shrub.
So do you understand what I was trying to do with that shrub?
It still looks pretty tall though.
I could even take it down further. I mean, so you're never done pruning a plant that's in your landscape. You're trying to adjust its growth and its shape. And you're always gonna do corrective pruning the next season and just seeing what, if it's still being aggressive in that one stem, it may just all go, that one stem. I may just cut it all out. And maybe I should have. But that's what's fun about pruning is you can adjust it as you go forward to get the form that you want. I can prune that. I could have made that into a lilac tree if I just pruned all those branches off. I had that one aggressive one, and it could have been a tree form lilac, which makes no sense at all to me.
How tall does that grow? If you just trimmed everything.
Well, it's just like my neighbor. I think this is an aggressive lilac plant. My wife bought it, so it's going to act more. It's going to be want to be a bigger shrub. I mean, when I was growing up, the neighbor's property was had a visual barrier of lilacs that were probably 12, 13, 14 foot tall. So now lilac can be a pretty. The ones that give us a lot of color now are more shrub form. So there's different cultivars of lilac, and that's why when you buy a plant, you want to have a picture in the mind what you want it to look like when it's mature. So it is that going to be that size based upon the cultivar you select. Instead of pruning should be a corrective tool to remove broken branches, to maybe thicken a plant up. That's in the shrub form, to regenerate new growth in a shrub, to remove damaged branches from a tree. It shouldn't be a tool to keep the size that you want it to be, unless you like doing a lot of landscape work. If pruning causes you to have calm after a busy day at work, then get shrubs you gotta prune all the time. If that actually relaxes you, and that's something you find enjoyable. But if you want a low maintenance landscape, we don't want plants that we're trying to size by pruning. Pruning should be just to correct the growth and regenerate the plant and remove damaged parts of plants. That's what we should be using pruning for. Or you got a job. It's not going to be a low maintenance landscape. It's going to be an ongoing effort. So now we're going to look at this limb. As a tree grows up, you should be removing some of the lower limbs that can be problem limbs. So this one is a problem limb because the tree is too close to the house. So I got two options: remove this limb or cut the tree down. So that's my options. And today I'm removing the limb. Well, the first cut is the undercut, the branch. Then I'll come back and cut on the top, and the weight of the branch will remove it from the tree.
They cut it right here.
But I wanted to, as it falls, not to rip the bark down the side of the tree, which can happen due to the weight. So the purpose of the undercut is to protect the bark going down the trunk.
Right here.
So that's the branch that I removed from the tree, too close to the root. And as trees grow, it makes sense to remove lower trees, limbs that can be problematic. But as we go and look at where the branch is removed, you can see the collar is still intact.
That's the root collar right
didn't
there.
damage the tree by pulling bark down to the weight.
So I gotta
Now I
remove
just
some
have
of
to
this, will be
remove
a dead stump.
This,
It'll just die.
what remains closer to collar, so we don't have a dead stub, and collar then can grow over the exposed wood and to follow that natural angle on that branch. So until the collar covers it, it can shed water and not collect water, which could rot into the tree trunk. So this is the final step where you cut, remove the limb.
There's the
little stub
collar.
At an angle.
I didn't cut into the
above
collar.
so it can grow back and we don't have a dead stump. So this is removing a large limb. It's a tree cut method. First you undercut it, top cut it, remove the limb, and then cut above the collar, close to the tree so you don't have a stump, but you still have that collar material to grow around the stump. So the idea is eventually you want that to grow over and cover it with bark again. So that's why we want to leave that root collar intact. And even on smaller branches, you want to allow that material there, even though it's smaller, to be left behind to cover the pruned wound. We typically prune plants once the season. I mean, this is a winter activity you can do on most trees. The trees that we don't want to prune in the winter time is things that flower in the spring. But pruning a tree any season, if it's done properly, is not going to hurt the plant or the shrub because we're just trying to remove material that needs to go. The timing is usually due to waiting. It's going to cool off pretty soon, so that wound is going to start healing next spring. So it's ideally is why we usually do it in the wintertime or late fall, do the pruning so that when spring comes and regrowth starts, it can start being healed over before anything starts rotting it, and shedding the water is important when we leave it, but we want to be always paying attention to where that root collar is so that we're not damaging it as we're doing that final cut to remove what would be a stump. I saw a tree in southern Indiana. I should have taken a picture of it. They came in and they just randomly cut the tree off like a shrub. And then there were logs about this big, about that big around, all throughout the canopy of the tree because they didn't cut it at the right spot. If they have cut close to where regrowth is going to occur, then it would have not had dead stumps up in that tree. Usually when we remove a limb, we want to take it all the way back either to the trunk or to where we want the regrowth to occur. For example, if I had a branch growing at a wrong angle, it would probably need to be taken off close to the tree because we just want one central leader and not multiple branching occurring when our trees are small enough that we can prune them. And sometimes we just need a heading cut is when you don't take it all the way back to the main branch. You're just trying to reduce the size of a branch like in a shrub or in a tree. We do a lot of that with fruit trees because you may have a fruit limb that's going out, but then whenever we prune a tree, you're going to encourage new growth. So we got to take off growth that's not going to be productive for that fruit tree. And like peach trees, We prune really heavily because they produce fruit on new wood. Pears and apple trees, we just do corrective pruning once we got the scaffold we call established, the main branches coming off the central leader of that tree, because it produces fruit on old wood. So if we prune it hard, we're going to reduce our fruit crop on pears and apple trees. On peach trees, we increase fruit crop by heavily pruning it because it's the new wood that produces the fruit. So it depends on those factors on fruit trees. But we just always want to be addressing our trees issues in our landscape when they're smaller trees, and we can do it in a safe manner. Any questions about pruning? I know I guess I should have showed you the tools. A hand pruner is what you use for pencil sized wood. So unless you get really industrial sized hand pruners, that's all the bigger you're supposed to be pruning with the hand pruners. And an inch or so diameter is the maximum for the large loppers. And then you use saws, to remove branches. I had an extension educator in Southern Indiana that had someone that did maintenance, I think, in a park that took a loppers and tried to really get really large limbs in it. He broke it. So he asked if he could have that just so he could have a visible piece showing you that that's not what you're supposed to do. So, and keeping your tools sharp is important. And chainsaws you can use if you know how to use a chainsaw, and they have them on the end of a long pole to where you don't have to climb a ladder, or they have saws, which I'd recommend for most people to use on the end of a long pole, so you don't have to climb ladders to do this type of pruning. So they got different tools that you can get. And I'm sad to lose Price Nursery because I guess he's not moving. Mark Goss knows more about pruning than well, what do I want to say? Knows he's just done it his whole career, so he's really good to do demonstrations. I used to use him with my Master Gardener classes. But Price Nursery doesn't exist anymore. If you want a good deal on some stuff, they're having their auction on the 30th of this month, selling off all their equipment and items that they use for landscaping. Oh, that's good. Clean those out. So just talking about some different plants. So, if you want deer resistant, you need to go to a list that tells you that. And in this case, it's a bleeding heart is deer resistant, so they won't eat it. They'll go into a landscape that's fall shade, part shade, and prefers, and just as important, a moist, fertile, well-drained soil. A lot of plants want good drainage, so that's a critical element. But just knowing there's different cultivars, but just knowing they're tolerant. This one's really good for our zone. They can tolerate that partial shade or shade environment. So you just need to select a plant that meets the needs of a landscape area. And then just looking at plants with different environments that are deer resistant. In this case, it's a good old bearded iris, so they leave those alone. They're hardy to our zone. They need full sun though, so they wouldn't go well. They won't present themselves well in a shady environment, and they need a well-drained soils, medium texture. So if you have a heavy soil that tends to be wet, and when you're doing your landscape checkup, you always want to see the drainage around your house, because your soils may be well drained, but the area around your house may not be. There can be pockets. I've seen that before where due to rain downspouts or water coming off, or just where it pools. Some people have downspouts that just go out into the yard versus downspouts that go into a drainage system around the house. Sometimes they will create wet areas. So you just need to either correct that or select plants that can handle that moisture area. So know your landscape, and I can't tell you what your landscape's like. But you can go to NRCS soil website and I'll tell you what your native soils are. So you just Google NRCS soil website. It'll come up to a site because we pay a lot of money for them to do soil surveys so they know what our soils are. And you can see what your native soil was at where your house was built. That could tell you the drainage of your property. And when you get to that site, there's a green button you push, then you go to the address site and you just put in your address. And then at that site, then you can make an area of interest around your house. And it'll tell you everything you want to know about what your parent soil was, down to a great depth. I'll tell you its drainage, how fast water will pass through that. And then you got then account for what happened to your property after they built the house. Because sometimes they sell off the topsoil and use the lower soil to fill back in. Because you create a void when you build a basement or even a crawl space. So just knowing your landscape is important for knowing how well your soils are going to drain. So in this case, it's lavender. Everyone likes lavender. This one is hardy, zone 5 to 9. Some lavenders aren't hardy to zone 5. And you can see we're on the edge or fringe of its hardiness. Because though we're zone 5, we get temperatures that are zone 4 in some severe winter events. So if it's just zone 5, you want to give it a little break where you plant it. You don't want to put it out where it's going to be fully exposed if it's just down to zone 5, ideally. But it needs full sun, so you want to think about that, and needs a well-drained, moderately fertile soil. So we have someone growing lavender here in Marshall County by Pretty Lake on the south side. He has put up some beds to be able to harvest it and utilize it commercially. Another plant deers won't consume is our state flower, peonies. I haven't seen them eat mine, and I've got deer in my land, but it's hardy to zone 2. So it's one that we can put anywhere we want in the landscape as long as we have the soil needs and the full sun requirements met. So neutral to slightly acid is a typical pH range that we want plants. Remember when I talked about pH, that's going to determine the nutrient availability to that plant in our first session. So knowing your soil pH is important. So you know if you have the right pH for the plants you're growing in that site. So again, for vinca, we have a plant that's hardy for our site, full sun, well drained, and it's one that deers will leave alone. The deer will leave this one alone. This is actually has some toxicity to this plant. This cute little lily of the valley. This was a plant my grandmother used in her landscape on the north side of her house where it had shade, so it fit the environment. You know, so knowing it's a shade loving plant, it's well drained, and it can get growing beyond the bed, but if you mow it off, you'll keep it in check so it's not an invasive plant. And creeping thyme. So if you don't have enough time, you can get some that's creeping. It's hardy to zone 4, so it's hardy to our zone 5. So it can actually handle -20. That's what zone 4 goes down to. And we rarely get that cold, or definitely rarely get below -20 down. We did one winter, got down in the rural areas down to -27. Just remember, if you live in town, everyone's wasting heat around you, so you're not going to get quite as cold if you're in an urban environment as out in the countryside. So then this plant is just partial shade, so it can tolerate some shading. It needs a well-drained site though. And what I'm demonstrating is I have handouts here with plants for different environments. So we just look at those, depending on what kind of plants you want. And then if you want deer resistant, you'll refer to the other publication. And then you can go online and just put in that plant and see more specific its characteristics that it has. The height when it blooms, there's all considerations we want to do when we select plants for a landscape around our house or in flower beds. So you want to know when that's blooming time is going to be as well. Because like I said, the first time we want to watch our landscape so we have something interesting going on our beds throughout the year. Whenever you have a significant part of the year, it's just uninteresting foliage, that can be a problem. Some plants we use again for foliage, like hostas is the main reason why we plant them, is for the foliage, and other plants have got texture to them. So you just got to be a little creative when you're thinking about landscaping. Oh, I'm missing things I put in. Didn't save. Really? Okay. So what I did want to address is privacy, just talking about, and I didn't have the greatest pictures, but when you're trying to divide your property up, you know, if you have a corner lot that's just open, I had a nice picture where they just put a fence in up by their house so they have an area where they could drink their coffee. So fence works best. And then the height of the fence determines, do you want real privacy where they know not to pass that area? It's a barrier that adds some safety so they can't really climb it. Or do you just want to, like if you have a corner lot, have a fence on one side because you really want to enter your property on the front side. So you may have a shorter fence on one side just to say, hey, this is not where you enter my property, but you don't want to make it uninviting, you know, so it's could be a fence, or you can put the fence around the perimeter of the property to achieve that. And plants can do the same thing. So we can utilize plants to give ourselves some barrier, but plants take width, right? You know, so to have plants as your barrier, you need the width for them to work if you're trying to grow plants tall enough. Like that neighbor's shrubs that was lilacs, they're 12 to 15 foot high, but they're also about that wide, you know, so that took up significant space, 8 foot or more, to have that large plant that was giving that barrier. And what was they wanted the barrier from was the alley behind their house. So if cars are going back there, that they have their privacy. So you want to think about, do I have the width to use plants? If you live in the countryside, you actually can use plants to block wind. Or if you have wind issues, you may think about how you can use fencing solid to help divert the wind away. When I am in the wintertime, wind comes up my driveway, swirls around in front of my house. So I really need to do something because it dumps all the snow in a pile in my driveway that I have to move because of how the wind is. It's not the depth of the snow that fell, it's where the wind placed it. So sometimes we use fencing to help encourage that to occur elsewhere, whether it's snow fencing just for the wintertime or some other barrier material to change how that wind whips around my house, for example, where it just puts the snow. Because when you need to get to work and you have a pile of snow this high just because of the wind and the other snow is closer to the ground, we can do some landscaping with fencing to address that. Sorry for not having those slides in there. So now it's your turn. You have any questions for me? Been together for 3 nights.
One question. What is a good evergreen that is not susceptible to diseases right now?
There's several. I mean, it's not, let me tell you what not to get. Don't get, for if you want pine, it's white pine works. If you want an ornamental pine for the landscape, like local pine, they work too. You just got to keep pruning. They'll stay small naturally for a long time. Then they start getting bigger. It's like LD was saying in our first session, those pines will get bigger. And so if you don't prune them back, then where it's still green, you would kill that branch, so you gotta be on some pines pruning. Spruces, it's not the blue spruce, nor it's more, there's a couple different spruces, different colors, there's a black spruce, I believe. So it's just looking for some of the other spruces that don't have the needle cast disease.
Which one is it that has the needle cast?
The blue, or the one that everyone likes, is the one we don't want to use. And then there's well, there's multiple pines. What I always say is do some diversity and do the research to make sure they're not sharing a disease is the main thing. Because needle cast disease in Douglas fir is not the same as the needle cast disease that gets on blue spruces. And we don't want to do a solid planting of any spruce. What are you wanting to do it for?
It's gonna be, well, we have a big spruce right now, but I think it has that disease, so we're going to get rid of it, plant something else.
We got excited by cypress. You know, an Alaska cypress we saw at Wellfield's garden that has a unique form to it. And it was tolerating some shade, so that one was doing.
So you can see this is what we have there now.
Well, that's not a blue spruce, that's good.
What kind of spruce is it? What kind of tree? Can you tell?
It could be like that. Type of a spruce. So just as getting some open areas is the issue that you're having with it.
Yeah, it doesn't look very good.
You can prune out the wood as long as you leave some green behind. You just can't go beyond the green when you're pruning evergreens. And shaping them can help. You do that in the early half of the year. So what it doesn't have is your Christmas tree form, right? And it's more of an open profile. So is there any dead limbs in there that don't have any green on them?
There's some areas that they have some brown going on.
Should have taken that picture.
Just call me, I'll come out and look at it. So why is this one pruned down? What, you just didn't want those lower branches on that tree? Is that an evergreen? Oh,
No,
that's
it.
that's a maple. So it probably needs, if you want to be able to mow underneath it. you
Yeah,
prune it
but
up.
that's the plan for this winter.
Hmm.
Those are gonna get.
Yeah, so the idea is you don't have to duck to mow underneath the tree. So what I've got is that's a good idea for that one. This one, well, come out and look, see if pruning could help it, or do you want an evergreen there for?
I would kind of rather than that. Wouldn't you?
Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to come out because there's some other trees that, well, probably need to, yeah, that one right there. What is that? It gets leaves in the early spring and it loses by July, they're gone.
Well, it sounds like a crabapple tree. Is there producing any fruit?
No.
That's an example of a plant that has a disease issue. So call me next spring, I'll look at it. But it has a disease issue, so I mean, it's acting like a crabapple tree. That's what they do. They get that apple scab and drop the leaves early, and they've lost their resistance. So that's a plant that you can prune back and just see how it does. Because it's not that bad, but
I didn't know if we could
You could do
Isn't that
heading
bad
back.
far enough that it would maybe do something, or if it's just too far gone?
This one,
Yes, that one.
it's probably healthy if it's been doing this every year. The spring's when you need the growth to leave, so it'll probably continue to do this presentation. You know, and that's what you have to decide. It's not whether is the plant gonna live, is it not? You want a plant that looks like that half the year.
Not really. I mean, I don't think it looks very good, do you? I mean, it's nice having it there because it kind of blocks out the neighbor's place. It's farther away, but it's, I don't know. I thought maybe it was dying.
Well, I'll look at that too. I mean, it's easy to check. Branches get brittle when they're dying. So if you can bend up and it has life in it, it's probably just a disease issue.
Well, yeah, I'll have a con- take a look at it. There's another little tree that's in the back.
That was Lacy's.
Got yeah, that one. You know, and sometimes it's just what we need to do is just, either print it back so we get regrowth or just remove it. Because this one doesn't.
There was a ash tree pretty close to that one that we had to take down. That died.
Okay.
Almost like a fungus. Like this is a lilac bush. That's up close. What is that that's on there?
It's not leaked out very good. That's lichen. That's an algae, fungus type. It doesn't hurt anything.
Oh, it doesn't? Oh,
No,
okay.
it just grows on there because it's not, it's getting light. That's common on trees.
Okay,
People,
so that's not a problem.
no, people try to remove that and they hurt the tree because they damage the bark trying to get it off. So that's just something that happens. That may be an indication the tree is stressed because there's too much light getting to the tree. You have a lot of it. So I would actually not be looking at it as the problem. I'd be looking if there's a root problem or something to why the tree's not being vigorous. So it could be a symptom that something else is happening to the tree when you have a lot of that on the tree. So I'd be looking for that. So that's a good indicator that maybe the tree's not vigorous itself. That has nothing to do with that. And sometimes it just grows on a tree because it's in a shady area, good environment for it to grow, and it's getting some light and it just grows.
I have a bunch of questions for you, but they might too.
Is there any other general questions? So what did I not cover that you wanted covered? What should I have done differently?
I missed last week, so I can't answer that question.
I was just trying to identify some problems you should be looking, trying to cover how I would, is that the one that we were talking about? So that's not what we were talking about.
I love that one.
We were talking about this, that's a cypress. You're talking about evergreens, you even got cedars. I mean, I got arborvitae. There's a lot of different type of evergreens. So you got to select one. And you just need to remember that we are in a hardwood forested area. And a lot of the evergreens were used to growing in a more drier, cooler environment. And that's why diseases sometimes are problematic with evergreens, is because they weren't designed to live in Indiana. We bring them here, so we bring plants here, and then we have some disease issues with some of them.
So now, are the cypress, are those native to Alaska? Or to the north?
That's where it's got its name. It's probably from that environment. It was, so when we use some evergreens, I may not do that well here. But just remember, disease is usually a factor of the hardiness. I have an arborist. Let me just shoot him a question and ask him. We got one on campus. Let me just ask him that question. What evergreens does he suggest for Northern Indiana? Because it's not a simple question to answer. I wish it was. But like red pine that they planted here back during the Depression, those trees are starting to age out in our woods. And they get a disease that impacts the new growth. So I've seen in urban areas they die. Austrian pines die from the same disease. So God just rule some out because of diseases. It's unfortunate.
Are there a lot more diseases than there used to be that are affecting all the trees? Or is it-
Well, it's a combination of cultivars selected and the disease getting there. You know, I think blue spruce has thrived for a long time because we didn't have a needle cast disease. But when you get it established in an area, then it spreads. And it spreads a good distance because I've gotten calls from people going, want to know what to do about the blue spruce. And the neighbor's tree, which is not in town, but out in the countryside, has been looking bad. So it spread that distance, which would be more than an acre away, probably a couple of acres away, even further, to infect that tree. So that's why I was going to say it's a triangle for disease. You have to have the host plant that's susceptible to the disease, the right weather, and the pest present. I think a needle pest disease and blue spruce, it wasn't present. And then everyone went crazy on it. It's such a beautiful tree. So then they get planted at a higher rate, and then the pest comes, and then it spreads. And I had people with 3 first having the same problem with that needle cast disease. So what's the solution if you want to save your tree? You got to spray with a fungicide for 3 years, multiple times each year. So is that worth it? And if it is, then you do it. That tree there, it may be probably, it's a canker disease that took out a couple branches that is causing the issue. It's not something that's going to kill the tree, but we got to see if it can, it's going to be an ongoing issue that it may continue to not look good. But the shape of it can be corrected by pruning. There is no naturally shaped Christmas tree evergreen. That they shear them every spring is how they get that Christmas tree shape. It takes a lot of work.